The glare from the polished mahogany of the coffee table reflected the harsh, unforgiving light of a late afternoon sun, catching the tremble in the lawyer's hand as he pushed the sheaf of papers forward. The documents slid across the wood with a sound like sighing, a soft, final exhalation of respect in the small, cluttered living room. To Clara, her father's daughter, and to Mr. Davies, her lawyer, the man sitting opposite them was an obstacle, a stubborn relic in a faded flannel shirt, clinging to a past that had no currency in their world. He was a problem to be managed, a signature to be obtained. The air was thick with the scent of old books and brewing tea, a smell Clara had once associated with comfort, but now found cloying, a symbol of stagnation. Her voice, when she spoke, was stretched thin over a steel frame of impatience. "Dad, please, just sign it." She gestured to the papers, her manicured nails a flash of crimson against the creamy legal stock. "It's a power of attorney. It's for your own good. It just lets me help you manage things." Behind her, Davies cleared his throat, a dry, rustling sound. He was a man made of sharp angles and expensive fabric, his smile a thin, bloodless line. "What your daughter is saying, Arthur," he began, his tone dripping with a condescending balm, "is that this is a proactive measure. It ensures your assets are protected and that your needs are always met, without the administrative burden on you." Arthur said nothing. His eyes, the color of a faded sky, moved from his daughter's strained face to the lawyer's predatory calm, and then to the papers. Power of attorney. The words seemed alien in this room, a language of conquest and surrender. He had refused her the $50,000 earlier that week, a request made with the casual entitlement of a child who has never known true lack. He had refused not because he didn't have it, but because of the hollowness behind the request, the desperate need to fund a lifestyle of glittering surfaces and shallow roots. His refusal had been quiet, a simple shake of the head. This was her response. An escalation, an ambush. Clara saw his silence as obstinance. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a poisoned dart wrapped in velvet. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Dad. Sign the papers, or you'll never see your grandkids grow." The threat landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner seemed to halt. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Arthur's face, a deep, profound sorrow that settled in the lines around his eyes. He looked at his daughter, at the stranger wearing her face, and then he did something they did not expect. He smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile of ancient knowledge, of a chessboard seen 20 moves ahead. He reached into the pocket of his worn trousers and his fingers closed around a small, smooth object. He looked past them, through the window, as if seeing a horizon they could not comprehend. To them, he was just an old man, a relic to be managed, a faded photograph in an album they rarely opened. But what they didn't know was that this quiet man, with his calloused hands and simple needs, had built empires with a single word and torn them down with a whisper. He had walked with giants of industry, and his silence had been more valuable than all their noise combined. They had come to seize control of a small, quiet pond, utterly ignorant that they were standing on the shores of a vast, deep ocean. Welcome back to our channel, where we believe that the truest stories are not the loudest, but the ones that echo in the chambers of the heart. Today we have a story about a father, a daughter, and a choice that would unravel a lifetime of secrets. If you believe in the quiet strength of honor and the ultimate triumph of character, make sure you are subscribed and have tapped the notification bell, because you won't want to miss a moment of what comes next. Arthur's life, since Eleanor had passed, was a tapestry woven from simple threads. His home, a small, two-bedroom bungalow nestled on a street of forgotten charm, was not a prison of poverty but a sanctuary of choice. He had purchased it with her 50 years ago, and every scuff on the hardwood floor, every faint water ring on a windowsill, was a verse in a long and cherished poem. He had once stood on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper he owned, looking down at the city lights twinkling like a fallen galaxy, and felt nothing but a profound emptiness. Here, Watching the morning sun illuminate the dust motes dancing in a single beam of light, he felt a connection to everything that mattered. His days were measured not by stock tickers and quarterly reports, but by the slow, rhythmic turning of the earth. He would rise with the sun, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee, made in an old percolator that hissed and gurgled like a contented cat, would fill the small kitchen. He'd spend an hour in his garden, a small patch of earth behind the house that overflowed with unruly tomato vines, stoic rows of carrots, and a riot of marigolds. His hands, which had once signed documents worth billions, were now stained with the rich, dark soil. He spoke to his plants, a habit Eleanor had teased him about, encouraging them with a quiet murmur. After his gardening, he would read, not the latest business journals or political thrillers, but worn paperbacks of Stoic philosophy and classic literature, their pages softened by the touch of 100 readings. In the afternoons, he would walk to the local park, his gait steady, a slight limp the only remnant of a long-forgotten boating accident. There, he would play chess with whoever occupied the stone tables. He played not for victory, but for the silent communion of the game, the shared language of strategy and foresight. He never offered his name and no one ever asked. He was simply the old man who played a surprisingly sharp game. His frugality was a source of constant frustration for his daughter, Clara. She saw it as a deliberate rebuke of her own life. He would mend the soles of his own shoes with a dedication that bordered on artistry. He ate simple meals, soups and stews that simmered for hours on the old gas stove. He saw no value in extravagance, no honor in waste. For him, wealth was not a thing to be displayed, but a tool to be used, and once its purpose was served, to be put away. He had used his tool to build a world, and then he had chosen to step out of it. In his pocket, he always carried a small, wooden chess piece. It was a king, carved from dark, heavy wood, its features worn smooth by decades of contact with his thumb. To an outside observer, it was a trinket, a piece from an old, incomplete set. But for Arthur, it was a totem. It was a physical reminder of a promise, a pact made with the only other person on earth who knew the full truth of his life. The king was a symbol of his greatest strategic move, an operation he and his partner had code-named the King's Gambit. It was a move so audacious, so final, it had allowed him to simply vanish from the world he had created, leaving behind a ghost in the machine, a silent, all-powerful shareholder whose identity was the most closely guarded secret in the corporate world. He would hold the piece in his hand, feeling its weight, its history. It was a reminder that the greatest power was not the power to command, but the power to be free. And he was free, or he had been until today. Clara stood in her father's living room, a place she hadn't willingly visited in months, and felt a familiar wave of resentment wash over her. It wasn't just the house, with its faint scent of decay and nostalgia. It was him, her father. He was a walking embodiment of everything she had fought to escape. His quiet contentment felt like a judgment on her own frantic ambition. His simple clothes, his meager meals, his refusal to participate in the grand theater of success. It was all an embarrassment. She had friends whose parents retired to sprawling golf communities in Florida, who sent postcards from Mediterranean cruises. Her father sent her hand-picked tomatoes from his garden, wrapped carefully in newspaper. The gesture, which should have been sweet, felt like a deliberate act of provincialism. She loved him, she told herself. Of course she did, but it was a difficult, frustrating love, tangled up with shame. She had built her life as a direct counterargument to his. Her house was a monument to modernism, all glass and steel and clean lines, a place where dust would not dare to settle. Her car was a gleaming German machine that hummed with quiet power. Her children, Leo and Maya, were enrolled in the best schools, their lives a meticulously curated schedule of lessons and tutors and enrichment programs. It was expensive. It was also terribly expensive. The pressure was a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of her life. The $50,000 she had asked for was for a down payment on a larger house in an even more exclusive neighborhood, a move she felt was essential for the children's social standing. When her father had refused, His calm, simple "No, Clara" had felt like a slap. He didn't understand. He couldn't possibly understand the pressures she was under. He had checked out of the world, abdicated his responsibilities, and now sat in his dusty museum of a house, judging her for trying to win the game he had refused to play. That's when she had called Mr. Davies. Davies was her husband's lawyer, a man who specialized in estate management for the families of the wealthy. He was sleek and sharp, and he saw the world not in terms of people, but in terms of assets and liabilities. When Clara explained the situation, he had been instantly sympathetic, his voice a soothing murmur of legalese and understanding. "It's a classic scenario, Clara," he had said. "An aging parent, resistant to change, unable to make fiscally responsible decisions. The law provides remedies for this. A power of attorney is the gentlest, most respectful way forward. It allows you to act in his best interest, even when he can't see it himself." He made it sound so reasonable, so responsible. He had drafted the papers in a day. He saw Arthur not as a person, but as a file. An elderly man, living alone, modest assets in a local bank account, probably some social security. A simple case. A formality. As they sat in the living room now, Davies exuded an aura of professional patience. He was the expert, the adult in the room, guiding a difficult but necessary process. He glanced at Arthur, at the faded shirt and the placid expression, and saw exactly what he expected to see. A man from another time, lost and confused. A man who needed to be protected from himself. "Arthur," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "think of this document as a safety net. You've worked hard your whole life. It's time to let Clara take on some of the burden. It's what any loving daughter would want to do." He smiled his thin smile again, confident in his assessment, certain of his victory. He and Clara were a team, a united front of modern, pragmatic reason against the stubborn, sentimental fog of old age. They were there to help. They were there to save him. The scene, which had started with a strained request, had now curdled into a quiet ultimatum. The power of attorney documents lay on the table like a treaty of unconditional surrender. Arthur's gaze lingered on them, on the stark black letters that sought to strip him of his autonomy, to redefine him as a ward of the state, or worse, of his daughter's ambition. He replayed the conversation, the carefully chosen words, the rehearsed logic. Clara's initial plea for the $50,000 had been a performance of filial duty. "It's for the family, Dad. An investment in the grandkids' future." He knew it was an investment in appearances, in a future built on the shaky foundation of social climbing. His refusal, the quiet, two-letter word, had been the catalyst. It had torn away the thin veil of affection, revealing the hard, grasping need beneath. Now, the lawyer, Davies, took center stage, his voice a masterclass in condescending authority. He picked up the top page, tapping it with a well-manicured finger. "This is just a formality, Arthur," he repeated, as if speaking to a slow child. "It's a standard legal instrument. It empowers Clara to manage your finances, pay your bills, make healthcare decisions if needed. It simplifies things." The word simplifies hung in the air, a euphemism for erases. It simplified him into a non-entity, a signature on a bank account she could control. Then came Clara's final, desperate move, the one that had fractured the very air in the room. Her voice, dropping low, had been laced with a chilling sincerity. "Sign the papers, Dad, or you'll never see your grandkids grow." It wasn't just a threat. It was a renunciation. It was the moment she chose leverage over love, strategy over blood. The silence that followed was dense, heavy. Arthur looked at his daughter, and for a heartbreaking moment, he didn't see the woman she had become. He saw the little girl with scraped knees and a fierce determination to climb the tallest tree in the park. Where had that girl gone? When had her fierce spirit been co-opted by something so brittle, so cold? He saw no anger in his own reflection in the polished table, only a profound sense of loss. He had given her everything he thought mattered. A stable home, unwavering love, the freedom to be herself. But he had withheld the one thing her world seemed to value above all else. the secret of his immense, invisible wealth. He had done it to protect her, to allow her to forge her own identity, free from the crushing weight of his legacy. He now saw the terrible irony. In his attempt to give her freedom, he had created a vacuum that she had filled with a desperate, hungry ambition. From the doorway of the living room, a third pair of eyes watched the drama unfold. Leo, Arthur's 15-year-old grandson, had come with his mother under protest. He was a quiet, observant boy with his grandfather's thoughtful eyes. He loved the quiet of this old house, the smell of books and wood smoke. He felt the wrongness of the scene in his bones. He saw the predatory gleam in the lawyer's eyes and the brittle desperation in his mother's. And he saw his grandfather, a figure of immense calm in the center of the storm. He watched as Arthur's hand slipped into his pocket, his knuckles white as his fingers closed around something. Leo had seen his grandfather with that small wooden king 1,000 times. He'd seen him roll it in his palm while contemplating a chess move, or hold it quietly while watching the sunset. He'd always thought of it as just a nervous habit, a simple comfort object. But now, seeing the quiet, resolute set of his grandfather's jaw, Leo felt a sudden, strange certainty. The wooden king was not just a trinket. It was something more. It was a key. The lawyer, Davies, saw Arthur's stoic silence not as strength, but as a sign of confusion, a prelude to capitulation. He decided to press his advantage, to dismantle the old man's final defenses with the cold, hard tools of the law. "Arthur, I want you to understand the alternative," he said, leaning forward and folding his hands, adopting the posture of a patient, concerned advisor. "If you refuse to sign, if you are deemed unable to manage your own affairs, Clara would be forced to petition the court. It's a public process. Doctors would be involved. Examinations. A judge would make a determination about your competency." Each word was a carefully placed stone, building a wall of intimidation around Arthur. It would be messy, expensive, and frankly quite embarrassing for everyone. He tapped the papers again. "This is the cleaner, kinder way. Keeps things private, within the family." Clara, sensing a shift, joined the assault. Her voice, no longer threatening, took on a tone of wounded pleading. "Dad, please don't make me do this. I don't want to, but I have to think about what's best for you, for the family, for the kids. We're worried about you, all alone in this big house." The narrative voice of the universe seemed to pause, to listen. The words were a cage, meticulously constructed. Kindness as a weapon, love as a leash. They painted a picture of themselves as saviors, of him as a victim in need of rescue. They saw a frail old man, and they offered him a gilded cage, believing he would be grateful for the shelter. But Arthur was not a frail old man. He was a lion who had chosen to live as a lamb, and they had mistaken his tranquility for weakness. He finally broke his silence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue or defend himself. He simply pushed his chair back, the sound of the wood scraping against the floor a sharp, definitive punctuation in the tense air. He rose to his full height. He was not a large man, but in that moment he seemed to fill the room, his presence suddenly immense, ancient. His quiet dignity was a wall they could not breach, a fortress they could not comprehend. He walked, with his slight, steady limp, to the corner of the room where an old, black rotary phone sat on a small wooden table. Its presence was an anachronism, a testament to his disconnection from their modern world. He lifted the heavy receiver. He turned to face them, his eyes holding a look they couldn't decipher. It was not anger, not fear. It was resolve. "I need to make one call," he said, his voice quiet but resonant, cutting through the thick atmosphere of their persuasion. Clara and Davies exchanged a look, a shared, silent smirk of disbelief and mockery. "A phone call," Clara said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Who are you going to call, Dad? Your chess partner from the park?" "The ARP hotline." Davies chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "By all means, Arthur. Make your call." They were confident. This was the final, desperate act of a cornered man. A bluff, pathetic gesture. They would wait. They would allow him this small, final piece of theater before the inevitable signing. They had all the time in the world. The tension in the room transformed. It was no longer the sharp, aggressive tension of a confrontation, but the thick, humming tension of anticipation. Arthur stood with the heavy black receiver pressed to his ear, his back partially to them. He didn't dial a number with his finger. He used the rotary dial, the zip-zip-zip sound an echo from a bygone era. Each turn of the dial was deliberate, a precise mechanical action in the silent room. Clara crossed her arms, tapping an expensive shoe on the worn rug. Davies pulled out his phone, a sleek black rectangle of glass and steel, and began scrolling through his emails, a performance of dismissive boredom. They were waiting for the inevitable. The rambling, confused conversation with some equally old friend. A call that would lead nowhere and only serve to prove their point. Arthur spoke into the phone, his voice so quiet they had to strain to hear. Julian. A pause. The name meant nothing to them. It was a common name, probably the chess partner after all. Arthur's next words were even quieter, a near whisper, yet they carried a strange weight. It's Arthur. Another pause, longer this time. The silence stretched. Davies looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance on his face. This was taking too long. Then Arthur spoke again, two simple words that seemed to resonate with an odd power. The King's Gambit. He listened for a moment more. Yes, he said. I need you. He placed the receiver back in its cradle with a soft, definitive click. The entire call had taken less than 30 seconds. He turned around and walked back to his armchair, seating himself with the same unhurried grace. He looked at them, his face placid, and said two words. He's coming. Clara let out a short, incredulous laugh. He's coming? Who's coming, Dad? Is Julian bringing his checkerboard? Davies sighed theatrically, placing his phone on the table. Arthur, this has gone on long enough. This is not a game. Let's be adults and sign the documents. But Arthur simply shook his head, a small, resolute gesture. We will wait. And so they waited. The decision to stay was born of arrogance. They would see this foolish bluff through to its end. It would make their legal case for his incompetence even stronger. The minutes ticked by, each one marked by the solemn, heavy tick-tock of the grandfather clock. The sound, once a comforting backdrop, now seemed to be counting down to something. Davies checked his gold Rolex, his jaw tightening. He had a dinner reservation at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Clara paced the length of the small room, her heels clicking on the floorboards, the sound like tiny, angry hammers. She glanced out the window, then at her father, then back at the window. He just sat there, perfectly still, his hands resting on the arms of the chair, a portrait of unnerving patience. The grandson, Leo, had moved to the window, his face pressed against the cool glass. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, but a strange electric feeling was in the air. A belief in his grandfather, a belief he couldn't explain, was blooming in his chest. The narrator of destiny seemed to hold its breath. A single, simple phone call had been made. A name had been spoken, code phrase uttered. And across the city, in the silent, air-conditioned sanctums of real power, forces were now in motion. Shockwaves were emanating from this small, quiet house, invisible and silent, but powerful enough to reshape the world. The game was on a new board now, and Clara and Davies didn't even know they were pieces. It began as a low, subtle vibration, a disturbance in the quiet afternoon air that was felt more than heard. It was a deep, resonant hum that grew steadily, resolving itself into the sound of multiple, powerful engines moving in perfect, synchronized harmony. It was not the sound of traffic. It was the sound of a procession. Clara stopped her pacing, cocking her head. What is that? Davies, annoyed, looked up from his phone. Probably just some construction. But the sound grew closer, deeper. It was the purr of high-end, meticulously maintained machines. Leo, still at the window, was the first to see them. His eyes went wide. Whoa, he breathed. A fleet of 4 black sedans, gleaming like polished obsidian, turned onto the quiet, tree-lined street. They moved with the slow, deliberate grace of predators. They were identical, their windows darkly tinted, their presence an immediate and profound disruption of the neighborhood's sleepy tranquility. They didn't park haphazardly. They moved with the precision of a military drill, pulling to the curb in a perfect, staggered formation, effectively sealing off the front of the small bungalow. The lead car, a custom-built Bentley, stopped directly in front of the walkway. The hum of the engines cut out in unison, plunging the street into a sudden, shocking silence. Doors opened, not with a slam, but with a soft, expensive click. Men emerged, 6 of them. They were dressed in identical, impeccably tailored dark suits, with earpieces discreetly tucked into their ears. They moved with an unnerving economy of motion, their expressions neutral, their eyes scanning, assessing. They didn't approach the house. They took up positions, forming a silent, unbreachable perimeter. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, their faces a mixture of curiosity and alarm. Clara and Davies were now at the window beside Leo, their mockery and impatience replaced by a stunned, slack-jawed confusion. "What in God's name?" Davies whispered, his legal bluster completely evaporated. Clara stared, her mind racing, trying to connect this impossible scene to her father, her simple, reclusive father. It made no sense. This was a scene from a movie, a display of power and wealth so extreme it felt like a hallucination. Then, the rear door of the Bentley opened. A man stepped out. He was perhaps 60, with a full head of silver hair swept back from a high forehead. He wore a bespoke charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Clara's car. He was not physically imposing, but he radiated an aura of such absolute, undiluted authority that it seemed to bend the very air around him. He stood for a moment, his gaze fixed on the small house, his expression unreadable. This was Julian Croft, a man whose name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the boardrooms of the world. A man who didn't attend meetings but summoned them. A man whose decisions could create or destroy fortunes, shift global markets, and make governments tremble. And he was standing on the cracked pavement in front of Arthur's humble bungalow. Clara's mind went blank. Davies recognized him. His face went sheet white, a wave of cold dread washing over him. He felt a sudden, dizzying vertigo, as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He knew the name Julian Croft. Everyone in his world knew that name. And he knew that whatever was about to happen, it was going to be the end of his career. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a loud or aggressive sound. It was a simple, clear, 2-note chime. But in the charged silence of the room, it landed with the finality of a judge's gavel. Arthur rose from his chair and walked to the door. He moved with the same deliberate pace, the same quiet dignity. He opened the door, and the world outside seemed to rush in, the palpable aura of power, the silent watchfulness of the suited men, the imposing figure of Julian Croft standing on his porch. For a long moment, the two men just looked at each other. The titan of industry, the kingmaker, and the quiet old man in the flannel shirt. Julian Croft, the man who commanded fealty from the most powerful people on the planet, lowered his head in a gesture of profound and unmistakable respect. It was not a bow, but an acknowledgement, a deference of a subordinate to his true commander. "Arthur," he said, his voice a low, rich baritone that carried easily into the room. "It is good to see you, sir." The word "sir" echoed in the stunned silence. It was not a polite formality. It was a statement of rank, a recognition of a hierarchy that Clara and Davies could not possibly comprehend. It detonated their entire reality. Julian's eyes then moved past Arthur, sweeping over the small living room, taking in the scene. The scattered legal documents on the table, the pale, terrified face of the lawyer, and the shocked, uncomprehending expression of the daughter. His gaze, which had been warm and reverent when looking at Arthur, turned to ice. It was the look of a man assessing a fatal error in a spreadsheet, a flaw to be corrected, an inefficiency to be eliminated. He stepped across the threshold, and his presence seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He didn't raise his voice. The monologue, when it came, was delivered with the chilling calm of absolute power. He gestured with a hand toward the simple, worn armchair Arthur had just vacated. "You see this chair," he said, his voice quiet, conversational, yet every word a hammer blow. "And you see old furniture. I see the place where Arthur sketched out the initial patent for the fiber-optic switching technology that became the bedrock of Apex Communications. A company which, I believe—" He glanced at Davies, whose face was now slick with sweat. "Your firm has been trying to land as a client for 5 years. He then pointed to the faded rug. "You see a worn-out carpet. I see the floor where Arthur and I knelt in 1987, mapping out the hostile takeover of the Vantech Corporation on the back of a pizza box. A move that doubled our net worth overnight." He turned his cold, analytical gaze on Clara. "You see a stubborn old man in a small house. You see weakness. You see an account to be managed." His voice dropped even lower, becoming more intense. "I see the architect, the silent founder and majority shareholder of the Croft Blackwood Group, a private equity firm with a portfolio valued at over $900 billion. On-screen text could have flashed, "Arthur Blackwood, the architect, net worth, classified." He let that sink in, the numbers hanging in the air, so vast they were meaningless. "Arthur didn't retire," Julian continued, his voice laced with contempt for their ignorance. "He achieved a state of grace. He handed me the public face of the company, the noise and the ceremony, in exchange for one thing: anonymity, silence, peace. His entire fortune is held in the single most complex and impenetrable blind trust ever devised. A trust so secure that only 2 men on earth hold the keys to it." He looked at the power of attorney documents on the table as if they were something filthy. "And you brought him this insult. You threatened him for $50,000. He almost laughed. A cold, sharp sound. "That amount is less than the rounding error on the daily interest his trust accrues. This was never about money. He wasn't testing your greed. He was testing your heart, your character." The silence that followed Julian Croft's monologue was not empty. It was a solid thing, a physical presence pressing down on them, filled with the weight of shattered illusions and a terrible, dawning understanding. The room, which had felt small and cluttered, now felt like a vast, empty courtroom after the verdict had been delivered. Clara stood frozen, her face a canvas of conflicting, devastating emotions. Shock was the first wave, a tidal force that washed away her smug certainty. It was followed by a sickening wave of shame, so intense it made her feel dizzy. Her entire life, her entire sense of self, had been built on a foundation of lies she had told herself. She had pitted her father. She had been embarrassed by his simple existence, while all along, that existence was a deliberate choice made from a position of power so immense she couldn't even fathom it. The expensive house she was so proud of, the car, the schools, the very air of superiority she breathed. It was all a cheap imitation, a child's sandcastle next to the mountain of his silent, hidden legacy. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years, and saw not a relic but a king in voluntary exile. The lawyer, Davies, was a statue carved from fear. The color had drained completely from his face, leaving a pasty, gray pallor. The name Croft Blackwood Group was the apex predator of his world. To be on the wrong side of that name was not just a career-ending move. It was a career-obliterating one. He could already feel the phantom vibrations of his phone, the calls from his senior partners, the formal severing of his professional life. He had tried to legally neuter a man who could buy and sell the entire legal system 100 times over. The sheer, colossal, universe-ending stupidity of his actions was crashing down on him. His carefully constructed world of billable hours and cynical maneuvers had just collided with reality, and reality was not grading on a curve. Julian's gaze remained fixed on them for a moment longer before he turned back to Arthur. He gestured toward Arthur's hand, which was now resting on the arm of the chair, his fingers loosely curled around the small wooden king. "That chess piece," Julian said, his voice softening as he spoke to Arthur, but loud enough for the others to hear. "It is one of 2. I have the queen. It is the physical key to the fail-safe protocol of the entire trust. The King's Gambit. A final move, to be used only in case of emergency. He looked back at Clara and Davies. He was never asking you for help. He never needed it. He was giving you a chance. A final chance to show that you were worthy of his love, that you saw the man and not the balance sheet. Arthur remained silent, his expression unchanged. He did not gloat. There was no triumph in his eyes, only the same deep, abiding sadness he'd shown when Clara had first uttered her threat. His vindication was complete, but it brought him no joy. Clara finally broke. A sob escaped her, a raw, ugly sound that tore through the silence. It was not a cry for pity, but a cry of pure, undiluted self-realization. The horror of what she had done, of what she had become, overwhelmed her. "Dad?" she choked out, the word dissolving into tears. "Dad, I didn't know." The words were true, but they were also the most pathetic excuse in the world. They were an admission of her own blindness, her own monumental failure to see what was right in front of her. The truth had been there all along, in his quiet strength, in his unwavering integrity. She had just been too busy looking for dollar signs to see it. The resolution arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet efficiency of a force of nature restoring order. Julian Croft gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to one of the men who had been standing silently by the door. The man stepped forward, his movements precise and economical. He walked to the coffee table, gathered the power of attorney documents with a deliberate, almost distasteful air, and folded them once, crisply, before tucking them into his inner jacket pocket. They had been nullified, erased from existence by a simple gesture. The legal threat had evaporated as if it had never been. Julian turned his full attention back to Arthur, his posture shifting back to one of pure deference. "What are your instructions, sir?" he asked. "What would you have me do?" The question hung in the air, pregnant with possibility. With a single word, Arthur could have ruined them. He could have dismantled Clara's life, had Davies disbarred, and erased them from his world as easily as swatting a fly. The power in the room was now entirely his, absolute and unquestionable. Clara stopped crying, holding her breath, waiting for the judgment she so richly deserved. Davies looked as if he might faint, but Arthur's gaze did not land on them. It moved past them to the doorway where his grandson Leo still stood. The boy's eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a profound, shining awe. He was looking at his grandfather as if seeing him for the first time, seeing the hero who had been hiding in plain sight all along. A flicker of something soft and warm passed through Arthur's eyes. He looked from his grandson back to his weeping daughter. He saw not the antagonist who had tried to betray him, but the broken child beneath the layers of ambition and fear. He gave a slow, weary shake of his head. "Nothing, Julian," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Do nothing. She is still my daughter." With that, he pushed himself up from his chair. He didn't give them another look. He turned and walked with his steady, limping gait, through the living room and out the back door, into the sanctuary of his garden. He was leaving them behind in the wreckage they had created. He was vindicated, his honor restored, his power revealed, but he remained unchanged. He sought no apology, no retribution. He just wanted his peace. The narrator's voice returned, a quiet reflection over the scene of devastation. True wealth, it seemed, was not a number in a bank account, but the richness of one's character. True strength was not the power to command armies or corporations, but the quiet humility to walk away, to forgive, to choose peace over war. Clara watched him go, a fresh wave of shame washing over her at his act of grace. The lawyer, Davies, slowly, shakily, gathered his briefcase. There was nothing left to say. He and Clara left the house without another word, walking past the silent, imposing men and the gleaming black cars, feeling their scornful, invisible gazes on their backs. The cars departed as silently as they had arrived, leaving the quiet street to its tranquility. The world had been turned upside down and then set right again. And Arthur, the architect, was in his garden, tending to his tomatoes, a king once more in his quiet, peaceful kingdom. What is the true measure of a person? Is it the life they display for the world to see, or the one they live in the quiet moments when no one is watching? Is strength defined by what we can acquire, or by what we are willing to let go? Let us know what you think in the comments below. We read every one. And for more stories that touch the soul and challenge the mind, make sure you have subscribed to the channel and joined our community of thinkers and dreamers. Until next time.